Neurotheology is not merely the study of the brain, nor is it a reduction of faith to neurological processes. It is an exploration of how the brain, the mind, and the community interact to shape and sustain spiritual experience. At its heart is the idea that these three dimensions, the biological, the psychological, and the social, form a triad through which we encounter the divine. The brain processes, the mind interprets, and the community contextualizes. None of these exist in isolation. Together, they create the fertile ground from which spiritual experiences emerge, grow, and transform us. Let us delve into this triadic framework and discover how neurotheology brings these dimensions into focus. At the foundation of neurotheology lies the harmony of coexistence, the profound interdependence of the brain, the mind, and the community. Scripture echoes this unity, reminding us in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 23, "May your whole spirit and soul and body be kept blameless." We are not fragmented beings. We are integrated, and this integration is reflected in the relationship between our neurological, psychological, and social realities. Consider how the brain and the mind work in tandem. Neural activity in regions such as the prefrontal cortex influences our thoughts, decisions, and emotions. Yet it is our mind, the interpretive layer that draws meaning from these processes, that determines how we understand the world. When the psalmist asks, "Why are you cast down, O my soul?" Psalm 42, verse 5, he reveals the feedback between neural states, such as those underlying stress or depression, and the subjective experience of despair. Likewise, the mind is shaped by community. The mirror neurons in our brains activate when we observe others, fostering empathy and connection. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 22 reminds us, "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but how often is that cheerfulness drawn from the joy of shared experiences?" The brain and mind do not act in isolation, but thrive in social contexts that amplify their capacities. Finally, the community shapes the brain itself. Social bonding releases oxytocin, a hormone that strengthens trust and connection while reducing stress. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 verses 9 to 10 teach us, "Two are better than one. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow." The human brain is wired for relationship, and those relationships reinforce neural health, even promoting neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and grow. Neurotheology asserts that spiritual experience arises from this harmony. The brain, the mind, and the community coexist in a dynamic relationship, each sustaining and amplifying the others. But what happens when this harmony is disrupted? Neurotheology warns of the cascading effects of disconnection. When the brain, the mind, or the community falters, the whole triad suffers. Take, for instance, Elijah's despair after fleeing Jezebel in 1 Kings chapter 19. Exhausted and overwhelmed, he cried out, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life." His spiritual struggle was rooted in physical exhaustion and the dysregulated neural states that accompany it. God's response was striking. He sent an angel to provide bread and water, addressing Elijah's biological needs first. Only when Elijah's brain was nourished could his mind and spirit reconnect with God. Isolation compounds this disconnection. Proverbs chapter 18 verse 1 warns, "Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire." Loneliness disrupts the neural circuits that govern empathy and emotional regulation, fostering anxiety and despair. Without the stabilizing influence of community, the mind spirals into fear and the brain's stress responses become chronic. Even spiritual separation has biological consequences. David lamented in Psalm 32, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away." Guilt and shame, psychological states rooted in spiritual disconnect, activate stress pathways in the brain, impairing both physical and emotional health. This is the warning of neurotheology. Every dimension of the triad is essential. When one is neglected, the entire system falls into disarray. Disconnection invites decline, but restoring balance brings renewal. Neurotheology also shows us that growth is intentional. Spiritual transformation is not a random event, but the result of nurturing the triad of brain, mind, and community. The brain, as Paul demonstrates in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 27, can be disciplined to support spiritual clarity. Practices like fasting or contemplative prayer calm the amygdala, reducing fear and anxiety, while activating the prefrontal cortex, which governs self-control and reflection. By shaping neural pathways through discipline, we align our biological foundation with spiritual purposes. The renewal of the mind, as Romans chapter 12, verse 2 declares, transforms us inwardly and outwardly. Gratitude, for instance, is a psychological practice that rewires the brain's reward circuits, fostering joy and resilience. When the mind aligns with Christ, relationships flourish and the community is strengthened. And what of the community? Worship and fellowship are not mere rituals, they are essential to spiritual growth. Neuroscience reveals that collective practices like singing or prayer synchronize brain activity across individuals, deepening connection and fostering shared meaning. Let us go to the house of the Lord, the psalmist declares, for in the community, faith is nurtured and restored. Spiritual growth arises from this triadic interaction. The brain is disciplined, the mind is renewed, and the community provides context and support. Together, they create the conditions for transformation. Finally, neurotheology invites us to consider the mystery of spiritual emergence. Spiritual experiences do not originate from one dimension alone, but arise from the seamless integration of all three. Consider Pentecost in Acts 2. The tongues of fire that rested on the disciples symbolize a profound neurological event, the activation of the brain in response to divine presence. Their minds were transformed, filled with courage and understanding, and their community expanded as they spoke in new languages, forging connections with people from every nation. This is the power of the triad. The brain processes, the mind interprets, and the community contextualizes. Together, they produce spiritual experiences that transcend the individual and transform the world. Neurotheology is a theory of integration. It reveals that the brain, the mind, and the community are not separate forces, but intertwined dimensions through which we encounter God. It teaches us that spiritual experiences are not reducible to mere biology or psychology, but are the result of their dynamic interaction within the community of faith. Let us embrace this vision. Let us see the harmony of God's design in our neural processes, our inner thoughts, and our shared lives. For in this triad we do not just understand the divine, we meet Him. Through neurotheology we come to see that our wholeness, our growth, and our spiritual experiences are reflections of God's purpose and presence in every part of our being.